Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for today's BU Alumni Career Webinar, Unhiding, How to Create an Inclusive Culture that Celebrates Differences. My name's Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Alumni Career Engagement Team here in the BU Office of Alumni Relations. Today's event is offered to our 366,000 alumni around the globe, and of course, all of our current students who are either just in finals or wrapping up finals at this very moment. Best of luck to them. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping everyone define and achieve their professional goals, and we aim to do this by providing everyone with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. I know we have alumni and students joining us from around the world. I think for the first time, I'm seeing somebody who signed up from Tanzania, so hello to you. But for everybody out there, please know that we really do value your participation in this and every program that we offer. Before I introduce our guest, just a couple housekeeping notes. Today's presentation, for those of you asking, today's presentation is going to be recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni and Friends website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions that you have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation. If you hover over your Zoom toolbar, you'll see something pop up called Q&A. You're welcome to just click on that and type in your questions at any point. We'll, of course, also probably be using the chat at some point. You're welcome to put your questions in there. And we're going to save time later on to get to all of those. But let's go ahead and officially get started. I'm excited to have our speaker here today. Have you ever felt that you had to hide part of yourself to fit in? Do you think anyone on your team, at work, or in your family has? Do you wish you could be part of an inclusive community where people feel seen and heard and are at their peak performance and productivity? If so, then you are in the right place. Our speaker today is an expert who studies and writes about expanding the definition of diversity to be fully inclusive. What makes her feel relevant was a defining experience when she was questioned about the diversity of leadership at an organization she was part of, and shared how she didn't feel included in that discussion. They dismissed her differences. She realized that she was still hiding, and that interaction helped her understand that the way we define diversity conversation contributes to people hiding parts of themselves. This led to her current journey. She's a TEDx speaker and the author of the best-selling book, Single-Handedly: Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection. Here to discuss how to unhide and build your authentic self in an inclusive workplace, please welcome our special guest, BU School of Social Work alumna, Ruth Rathblott. Ruth, super excited to have you here today. We really appreciate you doing this for us. I know you've got a slide deck. If you want to go ahead and share that with everybody, then the floor is all yours.
Excellent. Can you see it?
It looks great.
Perfect. No, thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me. And as you said in the intro, most of us are hiding something about ourselves. And by hiding it, it holds us back from being our best selves, from connecting with others, and from really connecting to ourselves. And so I start with, do you remember your first day of high school? Because I do. It looked something like this. I think my mother forgot to tell me, Ruth, before you leave the house, maybe you should brush your hair. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm still building the confidence to actually show this photo in public. However, I bet I'm not the only person here with a high school photo that makes them cringe. Just a little. Well, there I was. It was September 7th, 1983. I was at the bottom of my driveway waiting for the yellow school bus. I was excited and nervous because I was going to a new high school. And no doubt some of you can relate, starting a new school or starting a new job or moving to a new neighborhood. It's that feeling of being excited and nervous because things are going to be new. As the bus approached, I took a deep breath in and I climbed those 3 steep stairs to get onto the bus. And I made my first big decision of my high school career. Where do I sit? Not in the front row, and definitely not in the back. That's where the cool kids were. I didn't want to be near the troublemakers. No, I chose a seat right in the middle. And as the bus started picking up more and more kids, I felt my anxiety grow. Do you ever feel like people are looking at you? Ever wonder, am I going to fit in here? Will I make friends? Are these people going to like me? Do I like them? We were all checking each other out. And then it happened. One kid stared just a little too long. He noticed my hand. I immediately felt self-conscious. I tucked my little hand into the front left pocket of my jeans just for the bus ride. We got to the school and my hand stayed in my pocket. It stayed there for the first week, and that week turned into the first year. Now, most of us at every age don't want to appear really different. And at 13, that feeling is definitely magnified. I told myself, when I go back for the second year, I will stop hiding. I didn't. And then I went on to college and I promised myself, I'm going to be brave enough and stop hiding. I'm going to be someone different. I was starting a totally new atmosphere and a new place. And I said to myself, I'm going to stop hiding. I'm just going to show up as myself. But I didn't. I didn't know how. And it might surprise you to know that in a 2013 study, actually, I'm not the only one that's hiding. A Deloitte study from 2013 showed that 61% of employees hide at least 1% of themselves. Based on my experience and my research, I believe that 10 years later, that number is higher. The last 3 years alone has allowed some of us to hide even more behind those cameras off and those muted microphones. And as Jeff mentioned, we're going to use a little bit of the chat during this and I want to ask what you think people are hiding, because people are hiding things all the time. I'm wondering what you think people are hiding. And Jeff, as answers come in, let me know, because as I've been doing this work, people share more and more what they're hiding. And I hear about people hiding their disabilities, both the visible, like mine, and the invisible, like mental health and neurodiversity. What else do you imagine that people are hiding?
Suggestions so far: hearing loss, mental health, medical issues. Ruth, I remember telling you that I remember now, after speaking with you, growing up, thinking about how I hid some of my family dynamics from folks and what was going on inside our household. Religion.
Absolutely. Family,
illness,
religion, illness.
One's intelligence, sexual orientation, social status, fears, ethnicity and culture, political stance. That's a great one.
Yes. More and more politics, political stance. People hide their education backgrounds, people have told me. They hide their weight. They hide their financial status and their financial background. Their relationship status, people are hiding. The list goes on. It's exhausting and lonely. We walk around often thinking we are the only ones hiding. And we create stories in our head of how awful it would be if someone found out. It's why we feel disconnected. It's why we feel like we don't belong. And it's why our employees leave us and why they don't want to come back to the office. They don't feel seen and heard. And just to share a little bit more of the data, it turns out, again, that many of us are hiding like the things that you suggested, but to give it a little bit more context, 83% of LGBTQIA feel that they need to hide in the workplace. 67% of women of color feel they need to hide in the workplace. 61% of people with disabilities, the visible and the invisible, hide. This one shocked me a lot. 45% of straight men hide. They're hiding their mental health, because oftentimes we don't talk about men's health, men's mental health, and particularly we leave white men out of the conversation on diversity. So they are also excluded from that conversation. And what's interesting, as I mentioned before, 61% of people are hiding, and I think that number is higher. The correlation to that is only 36% of employees feel like they belong in the workplace. So over the next 30 minutes, I want to spend some time talking to you about the steps to unhiding so that we can begin today to implement the workplace strategies and the life strategies to build retention, to increase engagement, and allow for more innovation, and even expand the way you think about diversity. After this session, you'll be able to take the first step to let go of hiding, the thing that's holding you back. Or if you don't feel like you're hiding something, help someone else learn to unhide. Because if that 61% number is true, and I think that number is higher, then most of us are hiding something in our workplaces and our communities. So how can we be that ally or that person to help them unhide? This is truly a conversation for everyone. Hiding my hand affected me in my personal life, as an employee and as a leader. And I made decisions during each stage on how to hide. And as painful as many of these experiences were, they helped me find that what I believe is really my greatest contribution that I can make in the world. How do we unhide? Because what is personal is universal. And I know I'm not alone. Perhaps you, and certainly many of the employees you work with, have had to, at varying times, have situations where they hide. And if you join me in making the commitment to helping to hide and unhide, we can help others unhide. I know it's a very aspirational goal and it's very lofty, but just imagine the impact on your company and your community when more people feel comfortable with each other. Retention rates could soar, employee engagement starts to grow, innovation expands, and people feel like they belong. So back to my story. Growing up in Connecticut, my small town wasn't very diverse. So to broaden our minds, my parents took us often into New York City. We took that Metro North station ride for an hour and a half into Grand Central, and they wanted us to experience all of the educational and cultural activities we could. And just even that ride into Grand Central and getting off into that busy Grand Central terminal with all the noises and all the smells and all the different people was a first taste of diversity. And then just being in New York, going into Central Park, going to different museums, seeing different things, smelling hot dog stands for the first time, just something different. And that was there wanting us to see diversity in a different way and expand our minds. And my favorite part of those trips was when we went to the theater. As a little girl, I had the opportunity to see Annie. I saw The Wiz. I saw some amazing shows. And I remember falling in love with being in the theater, those tight seats, seeing the actors spit at each other, people feeling like they couldn't move when they were in the seats, just the actors on stage and the lights, the bright lights. I saw myself on that stage impacting people. But when I looked at that stage, I didn't see myself represented. I got the message when I sat back and looked up that to be in the public eye, you need to have two hands. So like most of us who feel like we're missing part of ourselves, we start to cover it up. to hide that part of ourselves just to fit in. And our culture seems to teach us that if you're different and you don't belong, we don't want to see your difference. But I get it. Act like you don't notice. Don't bring it up. Most people actually don't know how to talk about difference or ask about it, which is part of the problem. In order to bring differences out of hiding, we need to be okay talking about them. And for me, that means being able to ask questions without fear. Saying the word disability and having disability, the visible and the invisible, included in diversity conversations where it's often missing. As a side note, 90% of companies talk about diversity, but only 4% of them include disability in that conversation. The way we define diversity contributes to people hiding part of themselves. And it's when we have those tough conversations that we see the greatest impact and result. So let's take a minute to talk about why. Not just to talk about me. And I'm used to, over the last 3 years, being on Zooms and looking at myself and talking to myself. So I'm comfortable with that. But that's not why I wanted to be here today. No, it's so that you can step into my story and hear what my life is like without having to make assumptions. And probably equally important, it's a chance to sit back and think about what you're doing to create a culture where people feel safe to share their experiences and where you take time just to listen so that people feel seen and heard. For me, growing up, I hated the stares and the double takes. I was afraid of the questions. How many times a day did I have to answer total strangers asking, "Hey, what happened to your hand?" Or even crueler things like, "Did you cut that off yourself?" No, I backed out of trips with friends to the beach, and it wasn't because I didn't want to wear a bathing suit only. It was also because I didn't want to wear short sleeves. I didn't want the extra attention. I stopped going skiing because I hated explaining why I only needed one pole. No, hiding my little hand was the real reason I didn't do things. On dates, I ordered pasta when sometimes I really, really wanted steak. But I could cut pasta with one hand. It just was easier, and I wasn't going to ask someone else to cut my steak for me. My outfits always had pockets. I got really, really good at this. Even during intimate encounters, my partners didn't know about it. You see, I had written a story that says that this is something to be embarrassed about. I was petrified that when someone found out about my hand, they wouldn't be my friend. They wouldn't hire me. They wouldn't date me. They wouldn't love me. And they'd find me as ugly as I found myself. Don't many of us do that, though? We tell ourselves stories about the thing we're hiding, and it makes it worse than it actually is. I invite you to think about where in your life have you felt like you had to hide part of yourself to fit in? Or where do you think others in your life do that? And we often can't separate the personal and professional parts of our lives. I know that because I hid my hand for 25 years. So again, I ask you, and not for the chat, but I just invite you to think about, where have you told yourself a story about something about yourself that you're hiding, or someone in your life? Because again, the personal is also professional. I made a decision to even keep hiding it in a work setting. I spent a lot of time trying to prove that I could do everything that everybody else could do, but do it better. I was constantly overcompensating and overachieving. I was doing it faster, doing it better, staying later than others, coming in earlier. Does that sound familiar to some of you? So, like many high achieving 20-year-olds years ago, I landed a coveted summer internship at a New York City law firm. My job that summer was to showcase the evolution of a laundry detergent box top and why it deserved a patent. And for some of you, that may sound like the most boring job in the world. To me, it was exciting. It was my own project. I had to cut out and put together various box top competitors to show why this one box top deserved a patent. And as that overachiever, you can imagine my excitement when about 3 weeks into the internship, the senior partner on the case called me into his office. He didn't ask me to sit down. "Ruth, did you ever go to kindergarten?" He was pointing at my pile of crudely cut copies for my project on his desk. "Because if you had, you would have learned how to use scissors." I left his office embarrassed and ashamed because of my hiding. I couldn't tell him the reason. No way. So instead, I had to figure out ways to get that project done completely so that I could pass that internship or leave that day. Those were my two choices. So I started to figure out ways to get the job done. I started to use huge volumes of law books to hold down the copies of paper when I cut it, so I would cut neater lines. I spent extra hours in the dank and musty basement so I could use both hands because no one was around, so no one would see my hand. I stayed after hours and missed out on the happy hours and flirting that my fellow interns were doing because I could get the work done because everyone left the office and no one would see. And yes, I finished the job with a gold star and those accolades I craved. And you might think, well, that made you a very productive employee, that whole incident. That made you competitive. It made you overachieving. You got it done. It's true. It did. I was also spinning out of control. I was burning out. Hiding is exhausting and lonely. You don't feel connected to yourself or to others. It affects you how you show up. It affects the connection with your team, and it affects your leadership. And with all of that high achieving attitude and performance, you can imagine how quickly I rose in leadership positions. As a leader, I also made the decision to hide. I found myself with more and more pressure to perform, more plates spinning in the air. As leaders, we often focus on productivity and performance. We think that's a sign of a good leader. And sometimes we forget about people. Just like that Mr. Not So Nice boss that I referenced. We do it all single-handedly. And when we do that, we put up really strong walls and keep people at arm's length. We believe that if our employees find out our flaws, they'll think less of us. And that's what I did. When I was hiding as a leader, I didn't see the culture I was creating. I was teaching others to do the same, to hide and overcompensate. And even though everything on the outside looked so good, we were meeting and exceeding our numbers, I had created a toxic work environment. And I was exhausted, as was my team. And I was really lonely. And maybe you've been there too, or recognize that feeling, that moment where you just know something has to give. The moment you finally learn the hard way, that you can't keep doing this. You need help. And they say that when you're ready for change, it shows up and the universe greets you. And for those skeptics out there in the room or on the video, it's just sometimes when you reprogram your brain to find good and happiness, your brain obeys and it starts looking for it. In any case, I was ready for change, and someone stepped into my life with an outstretched hand. I made the best decision of my life. I invited them in. This person taught me to bring my hand out of hiding, to look at it, to touch it, to actually learn how to protect it. It had gotten frostbite every year since I was a kid because I didn't know how to protect it. I had the chance for the first time to see it for what it was, rather than not for what it wasn't. I had spent my whole life not seeing it as a gift. I learned how to actually love my hand and that part of me that I deemed unlovable for so long. And it was really hard. I'm not going to say it's really easy to unhide. It's not. It's a continuum. But I had never really tried to actually be grateful and love this part of me because I was too busy hiding it. I was so used to getting things done single-handedly that letting someone in was tough. I thought I was just struggling with the usual stress and fatigue, lack of passion for my job. But imagine my surprise when I found out that it was much more than that. It was all about my hand, or rather, my exhaustion from the struggle of trying to hide it and make up for not having it. When we let others in, we begin to change the way we see ourselves, and that changes the way the world sees us. And if you need any help with this after the call, I have resources you can go and access. Because just as living a lie keeps us trapped, we all know that feeling of telling one lie leads to another lie, leads to another lie. It keeps us trapped. I found there was momentum in telling the truth. Yeah, it can be really scary to reveal part of yourself to someone else, but it's totally worth it. See, unhiding, it allows us to lose fear. It allows us to form authentic connections with others, and it allows us to take risks with confidence. And let's talk about this for 1 minute. Only when we stop hiding can we truly connect with people. The key to connection is unhiding. The key to connection is unhiding. And isn't that what we all want in our workplace, in our lives? A place where we feel like we truly belong and find true connection? Because once I started removing the blinders that I had put up around seeing difference, I found a group of other people with limb differences and shared experiences. And it was super powerful for the first time to know I wasn't alone. I got to connect with people who had also gone through this. And as I started to share out and talk about my difference and share my story of hiding with others, you know what happened? As I got comfortable talking about me and my hiding, people felt comfortable with me, and they started sharing out their stories of difference and hiding and shame and challenge. Like a year ago, I was on the phone with a woman, and she was telling me after she said, "Oh, I answered a LinkedIn poll that you put up there, Ruth, about hiding. I'm not hiding anything. I get onto Zoom calls and right away I am myself. Everyone knows that I have an opinion." I said, "Okay, that's great." She said, "After talking to you, I reflected to realize that I'm hiding." I said, she's like, "I'm hiding two things. I'm hiding that I'm immobile from the legs down. I was hired during COVID. Nobody knows that I'm immobile. I can't walk. I'm petrified to go back to the office because people will find out and they'll think differently of me. I am in my head, they'll think differently of me. They'll think I'm high maintenance. They can't do the team retreat at the place they wanted to do it because they'll have to make special accommodations for me. I'm afraid that people won't see me the same way. And the second thing she revealed is she talked about how she has a child with mental health challenges and how difficult it is to tell anyone at work because they'll think that she chooses her child over her job and that she can't get her job done. First of all, you should choose your child over your job, but it doesn't mean you can't get your job done. And she said, I'm proof of that. I've done it all through COVID. And so we talked about who could she start to talk to about it? Was there a manager that she trusted? Was there someone in HR? Was there a fellow coworker? Was there someone on the outside? Who was that one person that she could let in to start? I was on a plane a few weeks ago and I'm on a plane. I don't know if anyone else loves to talk to people when they get on a plane. Apparently, my father told me he never wants to sit next to me when he gets on a plane because he doesn't like to talk to the person next to him. I told him back, I don't want to sit next to you on a plane either because I like talking to people. But I was talking to this young man, and as I talked to him about what I do for a living, his head went down and he sunk into his seat. And I asked him, what's going on? And he said, I dropped out of high school and no one knows. And so there's conversations around where'd you go to college or where are your kids going to college or wasn't college the best 4 years of your life? He said, I just want to exit the room because nobody knows. And I'm afraid if I tell them, they'll think differently of me. But I have this successful business, Ruth. And so we talked about who could he talk to about this because it was holding him back in terms of the business he wanted to continue to build out. It's all about hiding. So again, I want to check in. I invite you to think about what are you hiding and where are the places that you found support and connection? Because what I just did over the last 30 minutes is I took you on a journey. I shared with you where I acknowledged what I was hiding and owned it. I talked to you about identifying one person that I could start to share out that journey with and invited them into my life. Third, I talked to you about how I was building community. I found people with shared experiences of my limb difference. I found them because I was at a random Duane Reade, a pharmacy on the Upper West Side, buying paper towels. And out of the corner of my eye, I spotted someone with one arm just like mine. And as we started talking and sharing our experiences, she introduced me to something called the Lucky Finn Project, which is all about people who have limb differences. I went home right away and she said, oh, they're on Facebook. They have a whole group dedicated to it. I ran home, looked on Facebook, and sure enough, at that point, there were 30,000 other people who were part of this community. Now it's up to over 70,000. I wasn't alone. I started finding community. And the fourth step I shared with you is I started to share out my story, because what starts to happen then is it becomes a loop. And as I shared out my story, I've now helped other people start to realize what they're hiding and go through this exact process. It's 4 steps. Understanding your difference and how it's holding you back. Finding your person and inviting them in. Building your community, those with shared experiences. And 4, sharing your story so that you start to help someone else. It's that simple of a loop. And I know I've been talking for a while, so I'm just going to put the Q&A button up. And Jeff, I know we shared at the beginning that people might have questions or comments. Would love to just create a pause right here for those questions, and then just we'll give it about 5 minutes, and then I'd love to come back and just close with some further thoughts.
So again, folks, please take advantage of this opportunity. Put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box by hovering over, get your Zoom toolbar up, and then click on one of those options. Ruth, I was wondering, in the time that you've been with your book available, you've been doing a lot of speaking on the subject. I'm thinking specifically about the 83% of LGBTQIA plus individuals that are hiding at work. Have there been interesting conversations you've been part of about sort of international cultural differences around unhiding? I'm thinking about, the countries around the world where identifying as gay might get you thrown in prison. What are your thoughts for people that just continue to feel that they are unsafe if they choose to unhide that part of their individuality?
No, thank you for that question, Jeff, because it's absolutely come up before. The idea of and how I hear the question is, there are certain groups that still, it's not safe to totally unhide, right? Like it's not safe to unhide all of themselves. And I want to add clarification to this idea of unhiding. Unhiding does not have to be a grand gesture in terms of having the whole world know something. Unhiding can truly be finding your community and sharing your story within your community. And I talk about unhiding from the perspective also of, I'm not trying to create the Jerry Springer show in a workplace or Dr. Phil moments. What unhiding is about is, where are those places in your life that you've made decisions that are holding you back and holding you back from connecting to others? How are those places where you needed to fit in holding you back from connecting to others? I absolutely recognize that there are certain groups that still are unable to fully unhide at work. And so what I share is, again, unhiding is part of a continuum, and the same 4 steps still apply. Whether you're part of the trans community, whether you're part of the disability community, whatever you are hiding, it is about recognizing that part of yourself, right? Saying, this is how I acknowledge it. It's finding one other person as a first step to start to share out the hiding and the feelings behind the hiding. So it's a safe place. It's finding someone safe, someone you trust. It's then starting to build out community so that you get support. And that community can be one other person. It can be 10 other people. It can be that 70,000 that I talked about of finding support. But unhiding does not have to be a mass. It can be, right? It can be at any stage. And then it's starting to share your story within your community so that you feel heard, you feel seen, you feel that you belong.
Great question from Liz. He or she is curious about the reactions of pity or other negative receptions when we tell our story, what we're hiding, how to react and deal with that. I know from reading your book that you ran into those kind of experience of people, taking pity on you, Ruth. How do you suggest people deal with those kind of situations?
Yeah, it's so, my story, thank you for that question, Liz. I think, again, different people I think sometimes it shows up as pity, but I think people are trying to understand. I give people the benefit of the doubt initially around being able to ask questions, creating space for conversation about my difference or my disability. And I think that allows for vulnerability, that allows for curiosity. It allows for curiosity with kindness and support. The pity piece, it's interesting. I think it's so case by case, and I share this with everyone. I think that I don't allow for the pity in my life, though I recognize I don't see it as pity either. I see it as I can help reframe it for someone, saying, no, this is a gift. I know I've shared, people have reached out and asked to pray for it, saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Maybe if I pray for it, it will grow. And I gently say, I take prayers, and that most likely won't help this grow, because that's not the way science works at this point. So that I share with people that I appreciate the gesture. However, I'm grateful also. I'm at a place in my life that I'm grateful that I was born with this hand and that it's part of me. It's, again, hiding to unhiding is a continuum. And I think that wherever you are on that journey, those comments, you find your voice with those comments and that space. I guess there's some other tools. I go to therapy. I use journaling as a practice, and I also talk to other people with limb differences around the comments, et cetera, so that we start to understand them and start to challenge each other around the meaning of some comments and the pity. I don't know that I fully answered your question, Liz, but I think it's a really interesting one in terms of, I think each person is going to deal with the comments that are coming toward them differently. I've chosen to think of them as curiosity questions and more of opportunity to reframe and educate.
Thanks, Ruth. Another great question here from Melita. I have been interviewing for a new position. In previous jobs, I have been straightforward on having a disability, but after being hired, I require occasional use of a cane, crutches, and a wheelchair. Do you have an opinion on if I should be upfront before being hired or when I'm actually in a new position? When is the right time to share that when applying for a new job?
I think it is a really good question, because I think, again, it is a case by case, and that is not meant to avoid this question. I think that it is where you are comfortable in your journey of where you decide to disclose. I think it's also about knowing the workplace. I mean, it's interesting. At this point of my career, I wouldn't want to work for a workplace that was going to be judgmental or discriminatory around disability, period. However, that's a very privileged comment. I understand also, because I can say no to a job. And I say that I think workplaces are moving forward with the idea of disability and difference, because it's showing up now on applications where for many years it wasn't even a question. Then it got to, do you have a disability or not question. And then it actually came to a full list of disabilities that you could check off, oftentimes because companies want to start to be able to say, A, we're representative of people in terms of the hiring process and in terms of actual recruitment, and B, because are there accommodations that all employees need that we need to think about as we think about the workplace in a different way than we have. And I think COVID taught us some interesting lessons. So I think to that question, I don't think there's a right time or wrong time. And I know that sounds a little bit vague. I think that I am happy to talk about it offline and go through some of the scenario pieces, but I think for every person there is it's unique. I don't think there's a right time. I wish there were a right time to say, you should absolutely tell people that before you start a job, you tell them when you're in the job. It's part of you. It's not something to be hidden. But I'm very aware that there are still workplaces where people feel like they can't unhide.
Ruth, one of the most moving parts of your book, and I had shared this with you earlier, being myself as a parent of two small kids, reading about the relationship you had with your parents growing up. My question, what advice do you give to parents, particularly of young people, small kids, middle school, when their kids might be dealing with some of these challenges around hiding? How do parents best support their kids in dealing with that?
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that young parents, particularly, and yes, I talk about it in my book. I think there's two things. One is, we start off, if you've ever noticed kids, right? They're curious. They're curious about things that look different than they've seen before. So whether it's a person, a place, or a thing, kids ask questions. Kids are naturally curious. Most of it comes out of a kindness. It comes out of a genuine curiosity about life. And what we do as adults is, when a kid, and this has happened to me many times, I wish I had a nickel for every time it happened to me, because I would be so wealthy, is that a child will come up and say, oh my God, what happened? What happened to your hand? What happened to your hand? And a parent will immediately rush in and say, oh, I'm so sorry. They shouldn't have asked you that. I'm so sorry. Shh, we don't say that's not nice. So we've done two things. We've messaged to young people that curiosity is not a good thing, that there's only certain times you're supposed to be curious. And second of all, we message disability is something we don't talk about. Difference is something we don't talk about. And so now we've put the idea that disability is a bad thing into kids' heads. And so what I share with parents and what I advise parents, including my own, is the idea to create space for conversation, create space for conversation around difference by talking about difference and how each of us is different. Because my reaction to children when they ask about my hand is to say, this is something that's different about me. Each of us has something that's different about them. This is what's different about me. What's different about you? Because difference is a beautiful thing. Difference is actually what will bring us all together at the end of the day. And the second thing is, for any parents out there who have children with disabilities, and by the way, at some point, all of us will have a disability. It's either we will be born with it, or we will acquire it at some point of our life, or we will be taking care of someone with a disability. So disability will touch all of our lives at some point. Is that disability, if there are parents out there with children or loved ones that have a disability, is to ask questions about it. I went through my teenage years, and like most teenagers, when my parents would ask me, how is everything going? I would say, everything's fine. Everything's okay. Typical, normal, healthy teenage answer to parents. It's also about opening the space for conversation, not to be annoying and nagging, but to let them know that you're noticing things, to say, hey, I'm just wondering, I'm curious, I'm wondering what's happening here, to open the space for conversation and communication, so that kids know that there's a place to talk about some of the things that are challenging or not so easy. So I often advise parents to create that space with kids, whether they have disabilities or not have disabilities, but talk about difference, talk about how they're feeling, open up that space for how you're feeling. And that must be my MSW, my master's in social work that I got from Boston University, talking, because it's about creating space for conversation and communication.
Yeah. Well, I hope before we wrap up today, you'll definitely share with folks where they can find your book, but and I don't remember if that's on your next slide or not.
Close. It's coming. Yeah, let's go into just a closing, and people often ask, Jeff, they ask, well, how did you hide? What did it look like? And I show you, these are all the ways, these are many of the ways that I hid, whether it was always having pockets, whether it was, making sure that my hand was covered, even at my graduation, making sure that my hand was covered by my gown. Always my hand was covered. It was always thinking about it. And I think when we're hiding parts of ourselves, we're constantly forecasting our next steps so as not to be discovered. And I will say, as someone who hid for 25 years, I got not only really good at it, but I got really good at thinking outside the box and being creative. And I can tell you, the people I want on my team are those who've been challenged with something that they've had to think outside the box. They've had to come up with creative solutions. But it doesn't actually have to look like this. It can look like this. Because back when I was a little girl, as I mentioned, I loved the theater, and I didn't see myself up on that stage. So I told myself I didn't belong there. So I hid. And when we hide, we foster and continue the story that there's only one way to be. When we unhide, we give ourselves permission to come out of hiding. We let others see themselves in us. And this is a beautiful thing to choreograph within your organization. And you'll remember my first big decision that I made in high school, getting on that bus. Now I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you to take the first step in unhiding for yourself and for the others around you. I invite you to answer the question, what are you hiding? And take the first step in unhiding today. And what I've done is I've created a postcard that you can either take a snapshot of and print out, or you can use the QR code that brings you to a jot form. Because the first step of unhiding is acknowledging it. And when I've done this activity in different places, as I shared with Jeff earlier, I just started this recently, and one young woman said, thank you for the postcard activity. She said, because it's the first time I've been able to say my secret out loud, to acknowledge it. So I invite you to right now take a screenshot of that QR code or the postcard. Either print out the postcard, put a stamp on it, and put it in the mail. It's totally anonymous. The jot form is totally anonymous. It's also helping me realize that I'm not alone in this space of hiding, because that most of us, again, are hiding something. And as I build out kind of my next steps around representation around the globe, I want to be able to share people's stories of what they're hiding, because we're all hiding something. And because of this presentation, it's not necessarily the claps that I'm going to get at the end or the hearts that I get at the end of this, but it's actually when you go back to your teams or when you go back to your communities, I want you to think about what you just heard over the last, I'm looking at the clock, 50 minutes. And think about, what did she say again? I want you to think about unhiding in a different way, or hiding or diversity in a different way. And think to yourself, speaker told us this story and her journey of disability and hiding, and that at least one part, at least people, at least employees, sorry, I'm messing that up. Employees are hiding at least one part of themselves, and that's holding them back. Think about if you believe that's true, and if you think that's right. Let's come out of hiding and find our way back to the stage for belonging, engagement, and innovation. And it might be hard, but I can assure you it will be worth it. And if you need my help, just let me know. And here is my contact information for that to happen. As Jeff mentioned, I have a book out. It's called, and I'll put it in the chat, it's called Single-Handedly. Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection. And it's chock-filled with stories and vignettes about different pieces of places where I hid and where I learned to unhide. And also then it has a lot of reflection questions and insights on what this is about, because it's a different way of thinking about it. And it's a different way of understanding diversity and how to create those inclusive work environments that we all strive to want to be part of. The reason we want to go back to work, the reason we want to reconnect with people and connect. And most importantly, the way we want to connect with ourselves and stop holding back. So thank you.
Ruth, thanks so much for doing this for us. I know there was a lot of your presentation really resonated with me. I already told you about some of the personal things in my life that really helped me think about. So thank you for doing that for me, and thank you for everything that you shared with our alumni today and being so open with your story.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me here. And I'm just going to put the contact information also in the chat. So if people want it, please reach out. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. That's probably where I spend most. Is the chat the best place? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm going to send a follow-up email to everybody who signed up along with the recording of this. So I'll make sure that people have easy access to it. But while you're putting that in the chat, I'll also just thank everybody for tuning in today. If you haven't already, I hope that you'll join us on BU's official online networking and mentoring platform, BU Connects. You can see that above me. That's a great place to get connected to other Terriers where you live, where you work, and even some of the special interests you may have. So I also want to thank all of you who've donated to the university. Your contributions are incredibly important. We wouldn't be able to do our work without you. So thank you for that. I hope you'll join us for our next webinar next Friday, May 19th. We're going to be hosting a session that we've been getting some feedback on, to be honest with you. It's called What's Your Sign? Using Astrology to Get Ahead in Your Career. I will share with all of you, it is not intended to be a scientific exploration of astrology. I personally don't believe it's true. It is, however, a fun way to use a new lens to look at some new opportunities for personal growth and development, career exploration, and understanding your skills, and even applying some mindfulness. So you can sign up for that now on our website, www.bu.edu/alumni. And Ruth, we got a ton of people chiming in here in the chat just to say thanks and let you know how much they appreciate your time. And again, thank you so much.
No, and thank you for everyone taking time out of your lunch hour, if that's where it is for you in the day, or just being part of this. So, because BU was such a special place for so many of us, and the continued learning is something that's important too. So thank you. And thank you, Jeff.
Appreciate your contributions to this community, Ruth. Thanks so much. And thank you, everybody. Hope you all, as Ruth said, hope you have a great day or a great evening, wherever you might be around the world. Thanks so much. Take care.